Maybe not. Okay. Okay, so we'll go ahead and start. You can all see this, right?
Abstract expressionism is a painting movement that developed in the late 1940s and early 1950s in and around New York. Willem de Kooning, Jackson Pollock, Franz Klein, Lee Krasner, Joan Mitchell, Helen Frankenthaler, Adolf Gottlieb, Norman Lewis.
How do all these people come together in New York at this time? And somehow somebody had to make up a word for this kind of painting that's trying to point to something like really big. It's not landscape painting, it's not history painting, it's not genre painting. Like, it's a new kind of painting.
It is resolutely abstract, by which I mean abstract expressionist canvases do not try to make images of things as they exist in the world.
I think it's easy to kind of look at abstraction and say, well, it's abstract, so it's all the same. But in fact, the work is quite different from artist to artist.
Abstract expressionism as a movement was extraordinarily fortunate to have two very important and influential critics, Clement Greenberg and Harold Rosenberg. Rosenberg and Greenberg came at the material from very different positions. Clement Greenberg's account of abstract expressionism had a strong philosophical bent to it. He was interested in ideas of truth and beauty and purity. And one of the ways Greenberg translated those kinds of philosophical ideas was to see abstract expressionism as working through the purity of the medium of painting. By that, he meant that painting was no longer involved in creating an illusion of the three-dimensional world on a two-dimensional canvas. Rather, abstract expressionism was involved in exploring the limits of painting's two-dimensionality. This means that often the paint is applied in a way that lets you see as the viewer how it was applied. So with Pollock, you understand that the painting has been dripped off a stick or a brush. With Franz Klein, you understand that the brush has been moved in a gesture. You, as a viewer, have a very strong awareness of the process that went into making the work. Harold Rosenberg came at abstract expressionism from a much more experiential point of view. He somewhat famously imagined the canvases as a kind of arena within which the artist was acting.
Harold Rosenberg had an idea that painting in the kind of context of Jackson Pollock was not something that was a kind of premeditated idea.
What he's saying is that that whole activity of making, of being in the zone of creativity, physically, emotionally, intellectually, is the real meat of the matter in an Abex painting.
There's a lot of action. Like, what's behind this? What's the human experience? And that's what the abstract expressionists are trying to get at.
Okay, so let's see. So were you all able to hear that okay? I think you heard it okay. So you were saying you didn't, the video was not keeping up with the voices, or was it okay?
It wasn't terrible, but
Okay.
We could hear it fine.
Okay, so I think on the next one, what I may do is just select instead of doing it full, because what I've been doing is bringing the screen up full. So maybe I'll just do the select and keep it smaller. So maybe that'll help. All right, so let's just sort of see what you got out of that. Any key words that that you have written down or can remember some of the attributes that were mentioned?
I had written down that the viewer has a strong awareness of the method and techniques that the artists use, that they could feel basically the intent behind the making of the painting.
Okay. And how about the approach to a subject matter? Do you pick up on that at all?
Yeah, I did actually put that also as trying to deconstruct you know, what we consider three-dimensional art in the three-dimensional world, and then recreate that two-dimensionally. And I think that's a pretty interesting concept. You know, so the whole time I was trying to think photographically how you could do that, and obviously through minimalism is one way you can create some abstraction, at least if you were trying to bring it into two-dimensional works.
Right. Good. Okay, that's good. Anybody else? Have anything else jotted down or any keywords that you wrote?
I kind of had the same things that Curtis wrote. For me, what was interesting was actually just seeing all of the examples that they had. And like I would see an example, I'd be like, okay, so how could I do something like that photographically? So I mean, it'll definitely be an interesting, I guess, experiment.
Right.
To try and come up with a way to do that.
Okay. All right. Well, we're going to watch another one that's again about actually some of the people that she was already talking about. Mainly Jackson Pollock is probably, you know, one of the more well-known abstract impressionists that you know, he was part of this action painters group where, you know, he threw paint at canvas, but in a manner that he knew what he was doing. So it wasn't just basically randomly throwing paint at a canvas. There was a method in his madness, so to speak. All right, so let's watch this next one, and let me just we'll try it a different way on the share, see if that helps. So we'll do it with this way. This might be because it's smaller, so it might help. Okay, so this is actually a piece about 18 of what were called the irreciprocal 18, which is this group that was from the New York school, and they all sort of had made their presence known in abstract expressionism, and that this particular group became, all of them, each and every one of them became very well known. So this is a little information about them and some of their techniques that they used.
This has to be one of the most evocative pictures of the first generation of the New York School, the founders of abstract expressionism. You see 15 of its most important figures, but before talking about this image, its artists, and the movement they represented, we have to go back, as we always do when we talk about 20th century history, to World War II. Before and during World War II, America's art world was reduced to two main movements: regionalism and social realism. Any modern art was considered European, nonsensical, and worthless. But the war will bring over many artist refugees such as Mondrian, Chagall, and André Breton, the main theorist of the very influential Surrealist movement. In the summer of 1941, Peggy Guggenheim, with her Surrealist husband Max Ernst, flee from Nazi Europe for America. She opens an art gallery in New York City, called it Art of the Century, and shows European modern artists such as Picasso, Braque, Dali, and Miro to the American public. Most importantly, she'll organize solo exhibitions for many emerging American painters such as Jackson Pollock, Mark Rothko, Clifford Still, and Robert Motherwell. You can't overstate the importance of Peggy Guggenheim in the development of abstract expressionism. Art of the Century was of the utmost importance as the first place where the New York School could be seen. Her gallery was the foundation. It's where it all started to happen. But as stated earlier, the American art world was extremely conservative, which made it very hostile to the abstract expressionists. In 1950, a group of artists wrote an open letter to the Metropolitan Museum of Art to oppose this conservatism. The Met organized an exhibition called American Painting Today, 1950, along with an art competition, and the appointed jury was conservative and hostile to abstract expressionists. Many members of the New York School got together, and Adolf Gottlieb came up with the idea of writing an open letter to oppose this exhibition and its competition, which was then signed by 28 artists. It said, "The undersigned painters reject the monster national exhibition to be held at the Metropolitan Museum of Art next December, and will not submit work to its jury. The organization of the exhibition and the choice of jurors does not warrant any hope that a just proportion of advanced art will be included." It was published on the New York Times front page on May 22nd, 1950. The next day, the Herald Tribune responded to the attack and, in defense of the Met, called the artists the irascible 18, irascible meaning having or showing a tendency to be easily angered. The controversy was sparked and the abstract expressionists were in the public's eye. The extremely influential Life magazine, the same one that got Pollock famous just 2 years before, wanted to do a photo story to be published at the same time as the winners of the Met's contest. Life wanted, at first, to photograph the artists holding one of their paintings in front of the Metropolitan, but that proposal was refused because that would look as if we were trying to get into the Metropolitan and we were being turned down on the steps. They were very surprised at this because nobody refuses anything to Life magazine. On November 24th, 1950, Nina Lean photographs 15 of the avant-garde artists in a West 44th Street studio. Here, we don't really see rebels that want to revolutionize or burn the art world down. They didn't challenge the hierarchy of the system. They were only criticizing its conservative bias. These are well-dressed middle-class people. Barnett Newman was quoted saying that he wanted the group to look like bankers. Now, let's take a quick look at these artists. There's Theodoros Stamos, the youngest of the group. Jimmy Ernst, the son of Max Ernst. Barnett Newman, who became popular for his zip paintings. James Brooks. Mark Rothko, who got known through his boundless fields of color. Richard Pousset Dart. William Baziotes. Jackson Pollock and his drip paintings. Clifford Still and his peeled colors. Robert Motherwell and his dominant deep black patches. Bradley Walker Tomlin and his fragmented compositions. Willem de Kooning and his violent paintings. Adolf Gottlieb, who wrote the letter. Ad Reinhardt and his monochromatic shapes. And finally, Hedda Stern. Hedda Stern was the only woman in the picture. Arriving late, she stood on a table and was, as she said, the feather on top. Going back on the event, She said they all were very furious that I was in it because they all were sufficiently macho to think that the presence of a woman took away from the seriousness of it all. She later regretted the experience, saying that she's known more for that darn photo than for 80 years of work, and she went as far as calling herself an anti-abstract expressionist. This goes to show how little these artists had in common. All they had was a desire to create a new modern American art. They're just a collection of individuals, each with their own signature style. It's hard, for example, to identify the similarities between a Rothko and a Pollock. Recently, I've been reading a great Mark Rothko biography by James E.B. Breslin, published by the University of Chicago Press. The link to the book will be in the description. Breslin makes a great comparison between Rothko and Pollock's style, not by comparing their work, but by comparing their portraits. But before doing that, let's talk about the distinction between the two branches of abstract expressionism, action painting and color field painting. In action painting, gesture and movement are extremely important. Jackson Pollock, Franz Kline, Willem de Kooning, Lee Krasner, these are all painters who painted with their bodies. Each and every brushstroke is powered by strong gestural movement. Here, the process of painting is really what matters. The marks left on the canvas are just traces of that process. When looking at an action painter's work, what you really see is the painter's footprint, what they left after their performances. As for color field painting, what's important is the end result. The painting isn't impulsive and improvised, but meticulously calculated. The careful application of color, the planned interaction between the different colors, are all harmoniously orchestrated to create a feeling of transcendence. There is a spiritual experience one might get when looking at, for example, a Rothko. It might be hard to understand at first, but there's a certain mysticism about it, which can be illustrated by a story Rothko would repeat, which I'm taking out of his biography. He liked being around his own exhibition, and as Rothko was looking at his paintings, a man approached him and said, "You look like a sensible human being. How can anybody get away with this? Look at this. There's nothing. How can anybody get away with this? It's a disgrace." Rothko asked why'd upset him so, and the man started to sputter and carry on, but he couldn't really articulate what he objected to. It just wasn't enough there on the wall. After letting the man go on a little bit, Rothko finally said, "Well, you know, I painted these paintings," something he had to prove by pulling out his driver's license. And he said the man was totally flabbergasted. Rothko invited him to come to the museum's coffee shop and talk. A few weeks later, the man called asking to visit Rothko's studio, see his work, and talk again. He ended up buying a painting. In fact, Rothko added, "I have an appointment with him now at 2:00. He owns 3 works of mine." The artist as missionary converting the heathen, as Breslin puts it, isn't the only example of Rothko's work having this religious aspect. I'm interested only in expressing basic human emotions, tragedy, ecstasy, doom, and so on. And the fact that a lot of people break down and cry when confronted with my pictures show that I communicate those basic human emotions. The people who weep before my pictures are having the same religious experience I had when I painted them.
Are you tired of damaging your wall when hanging your wall decorations? Was Stav's picture hanging?
Now, let's look at the portraits of Pollock and Rothko, 2 very prominent abstract expressionists, one an action painter and the other a color field painter. These 2 portraits were made by Hans Namath. Here's Jackson Pollock in his studio in 1950 and Mark Rothko in his studio in 1964. You see both artists immersed in their work. They're both completely absorbed by it in their own way. Pollock is absorbed by his work by stepping on it and dripping paint, while Rothko is absorbed by his painting's captivation. Rothko could look at his artworks for hours, making sure that everything was perfect and really evoked what he wanted. Pollock is dynamic, dominating. He's using energy as his body is stretched over the canvas, while Rothko is sitting down, feeling his paintings. These two artists are extremely different, both in their art making process and in the final results they produce. As Breslin puts it, Pollock acts, Rothko meditated. So abstract expressionism is a very broad term to encompass a multitude of artists with very different styles. Any of the irascible 18 could have started their own art movements instead of being encompassed by abstract expressionism. Every abstract expressionist individual had their own specific style, to the point that a lot of them didn't even need to sign their paintings anymore. We knew who they were from just by looking at them. And perhaps that's why this movement is so powerful, not because of its unity, but because of the individual strength, personality, and autonomy of each of its members.
Okay, so was the video any better on that one than before?
Yeah, it was much better.
Okay. All right, so what any observations that you got out of that as far as any more clarification on abstract expressionism?
Curtis, you can go.
Okay. I had written a couple of notes, like some being that their efforts were pushed back on by just the art community at large because of how conservative it was, which is interesting because it's something I consider a lot, and something I wrote about in the Masters of Light class also, with I guess kind of gatekeeping to the artistic world.
Mm-hmm.
But what I did kind of to caveat off of that is when Time wanted to do that photo of them in front of the art museum, but rather than have I don't even know what to call it, and in Time magazine as the magazine it saw it, they stuck to their artistic visions and wanted to maintain their credibility in what it was that they were trying to do, which wasn't, like they said, dismantle the art community, but just to notch out a space for their own artistic visions and creative processes, even if they weren't widely accepted.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
So there's some. I have some other stuff too, but
Yeah.
I'll leave it for somebody else.
Okay. Emily, did you have a couple thoughts?
Yeah, I thought it was also interesting that there was just so much kind of pushback with their art. Also, that abstract expressionism as a term casts a very wide net into kind of what it means.
Mm-hmm.
That and abstract expression, like pointillism, for instance,
Mm-hmm.
has to do with kind of the way by which you create the image.
Mm-hmm.
But abstract expressionism, you can kind of execute it however you want. It just kind of comes down to not even similar qualities necessarily, but I guess I think the intention behind the work.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. It was just really interesting to see just how broad the meaning of abstract expressionism is.
Right. Yeah, it's not like they all went out and had the same technique. As far as executing their canvases, they're very, very different. And I think the two that we looked at, Jackson Pollock is very very edgy and very very emotional in the way that the actual paint lands on the canvas as part of his expression. So that's sort of like if we were saying, okay, what's an attribute to it? It has a lot of contrast to it, a lot of texture to it. As opposed to, looking at the other ways from the other school within abstract expressionism, at least with that group, that the colors were more muted, and it became more about an emotional response in somewhat the opposite direction, of Jackson Pollock. So it's sort of interesting to see. So, how would you say that you could apply anything that you saw to you as photographers or filmmakers, in creating an image?
I think like playing around with texture. I know it looks like paintings and everything, but it kind of looks like they were saying like 2-dimensional, obviously not 3-dimensional, but I can see some texture from like the paintings and everything. And there is like some strokes that look thicker than others. So like what comes to mind is just texture.
Mhm. Okay. Yeah, so I'm sure this is going to take a little bit more thinking, and maybe even reviewing, that a couple of these videos to go back over, or just doing some research on your own on the subject matter to have it sink in a little bit more, that there's a way that you can transfer some of these attributes, not necessarily the techniques, but the attributes, the concepts of how they're approaching it, and how that can apply photographically. So what we're going to look at next is two photographers who, are really prominent in our photographic history, that coincide with abstract expressionism with their work. And you'll see how they applied maybe some of the attributes that you saw in these previous videos. So the first person that we're going to look at is, let me see who I've got up here first, is Harry Callahan. And actually the video is going to be interesting because it compares Harry Callahan with Jackson Pollock. And so let's take a look at that. So Peter McGill is a gallery owner, director, and he did a couple videos that we're going to look at. So this first one, Harry Callahan and Jackson Pollock.
Last year, I was at the Basel Art Fair and happened on Joan Washburn's booth, and hanging in an alcove in her booth was this drawing. And I asked her who it was by, and she said it was by Jackson Pollock. And I said in my naivete, I've never seen a Pollock drawing like that. And she said, well, they certainly exist, but they haven't been seen by that many people outside of the foundation. So the scale and activity of it reminded me immediately of some early experimental work Callahan had done in Detroit in the early 40s. The date of the drawing is mid-50s, and the date of the Callahan Sunlight on Water is 1943. And what Callahan did technically to make the pictures, he put a neutral density filter on his camera, which allowed him to make a time exposure during the daytime, which essentially captured the movement of light on water over time. These men both came to these results through entirely different means. And the idea of the exhibition was not to say Callahan did this earlier or Pollock did it in a more famous capacity. The idea was to show that the notion of abstraction was in the air, and it could be done hopefully equally well by two geniuses from different parts of the country, Pollock from New York and Callahan, Detroit, Chicago. As we began to put the exhibition together, we found many more drawings that seemed to, create further this kind of synergistic relationship we were looking for. And we found this drawing, which interestingly, both of these drawings are smaller drawings on larger sheets of paper, which I think is just terrific. And to go with it, we found this picture also made by Callahan in 43, where he took a flashlight, put it in a dark room, lighted it, and took his 4x5-inch view camera and moved it around to make that drawing. So the hope for the exhibition was that people could come in and revel not in the disparity of dates, but the idea that abstraction was in the air and was practiced well by two different admitted geniuses.
So we're just going to go right into another another video that that he did that is just on Harry Callahan. So we'll just sort of continue that.
Harry Callahan was a man who was devoted to his medium of photography, whether or not he was photographing one of three principal subjects during his lifetime, his wife Eleanor and daughter Barbara, the city, or nature. And he would typically work on a single subject for a period of time until he felt he hit some sort of a dead end. He would either change the subject or change the camera. And it was his working methodology that led to an enormous body of work that was innovative from start to finish. And I've always been quite amazed to look at his multiple exposures, which were made in camera, not in the darkroom. This picture of the Chicago Loop consists, by my counting, and somebody else could probably be more correct, of 13 exposures made on one sheet of film that create a perfect composition that talks about life in the city, activity in the city, and also relates in a wonderful way to the music he was listening to at the time, jazz. The other thing that's interesting in these two examples is the issue of scale. The picture on the right is a contact print that Harry made in his own darkroom, placing the photographic negative in direct contact with the sheet of photographic paper. And the larger picture is a picture that was shown at the Museum of Modern Art and selected by Edward Steichen for an exhibition. And Steichen said, drop your negative off. He sent it to Campo Labs, and they made this enlargement. And I think it's just terrific that you can look at these two pictures, learn about Harry's passion for experimentation, how the experimentation led to a different language for him, for us as the viewer, and also how two radically different scales can both be effective. You know, the small print is like a powerful punch and you have to look at it in an intimate way. And the big print you can stand away from and feel its power and the dance of the city.
There's one section here we want to just go back and look at one more time towards the end here.
Powerful punch and you have to look at it. And
so, yeah, I think this is a really great point that he made about the perspective and then also the formatting, you know, how the small print with lots of negative space around it compared to the large print in the frame, you know, with hardly any negative space around it. And, you know, both have their positive takes on it, but it's just interesting to see the difference in the way that somebody might look at, you know, the smaller piece being somewhat fragile versus, you know, the larger piece. So that's again part of, you know, being an artist is how you present your work, you know, in the amount of, say, negative space around your image, if it's being framed or not framed, you know, versus having less negative space and the impact of that. So anyway, that's Harry Callahan is very well known for his abstract expressionism using, as shown here, multiple exposures, light painting, and use of time in essence, as we looked at. All right, now we're going to look at our second person, which is Aaron Siskind, who's of the same era. And I think maybe you'll probably see some connection to the some of the painters that we looked at previously. And let me see if I've got the right link up here. Hang on one second. This is the one. This is not the, actually we'll go to, all right, we'll use this one here. This would be better. Okay, so you can see in the banner up at the top, this is his photographic work. And you can see that it ranges from peeling paint over on the left-hand side to finding things that are existing in painted on the street, or things that he found on walls, or just things that were laying around. And I think that this second paragraph is sort of key. Siskine's work focuses on the details in nature and architecture. He presents them as flat surfaces to create a new image out of them, which, he claimed, stands independent of their original subject. So that's sort of where the abstract expressionism comes, is that he is eliminating any reference to being able to identify maybe like the location or the environment. He's honing in on, you know, these small little details. And I think if we look at, you know, what if we had to say define the attributes of his work, most of it that I've seen is in black and white. It's stunning black and white. When you see an original print, is absolutely amazing. And you know, by doing it in black and white, he's sort of making it abstract just by doing that, you know, taking out the realism of color. So the subject matter, though, is that he's most noted for, you know, are the things like we're seeing up in the top banner. Here's some of his other work, and very, very prolific with this type of work. And obviously, from what you've heard before, it hangs in, or it's in the Museum of Modern Art in New York, and collected by very prominent collectors besides the collectors or the art museums. So that's Aaron Siskind. Okay, so in wrapping this up, let me just stop our share here. So in wrapping this up, let's see, with Harry Callahan and Aaron Siskind, those are two people from, you know, from the past, from history. So what I'm going to want you to do for your assignment is have you produce 4 abstract impressionist photographic solutions, or you can do video. So 4 different solutions to it photographically, or if you want to use video. And in addition to that, I'm going to have you also look for contemporary people. So the two photographers that I brought to you are, you know, going back a ways. They were sort of the beginning of abstract expressionism for photography. And so now you sort of know about them, and you can do some further research on it. Their links will be posted. But what I want you to do is find a group, and I'll put the number at 3 contemporary people. And so you can search social media, use hashtags, however you want to come up with the people that you would find that are more the contemporaries. And I'll post that assignment. The assignment will be posted tomorrow, but just so that you can start thinking about it and maybe review the videos that we looked at as far as the definitions of abstract expressionism, or you can, again, search a little bit more on your own, however you want to do it. All right, so any questions on that? Any just off the top of your head thoughts about what you might be looking for photographically?
I'm actually really interested in Harry Callahan stuff. I had never seen that, but I really like his multiple exposure, and I actually recently figured out how to do that on my camera. So I think I'm gonna try and kind of take inspiration from that.
Great, good, excellent.
Yeah, I was gonna say the same thing with Harry Callahan too, because especially that last photo they showed was so interesting to me because, like I said, the one of that he took with the flashlight, and I know last semester I was describing that perspective of shooting from through the front windshield of a car while you're driving down the street, and the way you get an abstract basically painting. It's interesting. I was talking a little bit about the kind of something that I do anyway. So it was really interesting to see Harry Callahan's work, because a lot of the stuff that, for the last, 5-6 years ago, I was experimenting with forcing a double exposure in one exposure on a DSLR, and how you can even do that. And I managed to figure it out, and I created some really interesting images. And so it'll be really interesting to try to revisit this. I'm really excited. I never heard of Harry Callahan or Aaron Siskin, and both of their works are very interesting to me.
Oh yeah, they're phenomenal. And I would just say, if you ever have the chance to see their works in person, and in LA, that can happen very easily, especially at the Fahey Klein Gallery, which is right by, well, not too far from the school on La Brea. They have some of their prints, original prints, and they're magnificent. So they were both incredible technicians in the darkroom. Besides being, having great creative eyes, they were both extremely talented in the darkroom. So good people to sort of know about and look at their work and interpret their work to see how it can affect and inspire you all. Okay, so I think that's going to do it for this evening, and hope that gets you inspired. Get out there and start looking at the world in a different way.
Definitely did.
Good. All right, so if there's no other questions, oh, one last thing. I'm checking about class next week. If we're supposedly not on Zoom, we would supposedly be meeting in person at the school. So I'm still checking on that, but so far all systems say, yes, we're meeting at school, unless any of you have heard anything differently.
Oh, do you know about I think it's this Sunday we have the Art of Lighting class. Is that going to be still Zoom? So it'll be presumably be the next meeting class for that one also.
That's going to be a Zoom meeting.
Oh, okay, so we'll probably be in person 2 weeks from that about.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, 2 weeks from Sunday, we would be meeting for the first time in person on that class, because what the mandate, I think, lifts from the school ends on Monday, so that they can be back in the classroom on Monday.
Oh, okay.
Have you heard anything from any of your other professors about this?
And my other two classes are asynchronous, so just the two
Oh.
classes I have with you are in person.
Okay.
Yeah, mine are all online. So my dad hasn't said anything about it, so I think we're probably fine.
Well, he would know.
Yeah.
If anybody's gonna know, it's gonna be him.
Yeah, well, and I'm taking a class from him too, so
Okay.
whatever happens.
All right, good. All right, everybody. Well, we'll hopefully see you next week. I'll send out a reminder where we're gonna meet.
It sounds good. We're doing, I think we're doing, are we gonna be working in the printer lab for next week then?
I'm, hopefully that's part of it. I'll let you know for sure. If everything is copacetic with that, because I would want you to bring your laptops and try and download the drivers for the Epson 800 onto your laptops before we meet. But I'll let you know ahead of time.
Okay, sounds perfect.
Okay. All right, all. Have a good evening, and we'll see you one way or the other next week.
All right, see you guys.
Good night.
Thanks. Bye.